next, I wanted to introduce our amazing panel called #YesAllWomen, Amplifying Our Voice through the hashtag microphone. And I'm going to ask throughout the event, as we introduce names, if you can just hold on to your applause right after we mention them so we can just move along the program faster. So we've got two speakers. Who's moderating this discussion is Margaret O'Brien-White, an incredible woman on our team. She runs global partnerships and programming for S.H.E Summit, as well as Krystal Ball. She is co-host of MSNBC's The Cycle. Please help me welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello, S.H.E Summit. So exciting to be here today. So great to see such a packed house considering the weather that we're having right now. But I'm really excited to be here today and discuss a topic that, dare I say, is trending, and that's feminist social media activism. And in particular, Krystal, I'm so delighted to get to speak with you about this.
Thank you.
As a media professional, and especially a female media professional. I know you probably stay up on all of these particular conversations that are happening. But just to set up some context for you ladies in the audience and men, of course, right now women hold about 5% of clout positions in mainstream and traditional media. So the majority of stories that you're reading and you're seeing are really rarely driven by women. But if you look at social, by virtue of Facebook alone, women are far more active and engaged on social media than men, and the numbers are really ever growing. And if you look at the 20-something demographic, younger people are really turning to social more and more as their news source. So social media is really continuing to emerge as a platform for women to voice their opinions, to tell their stories, and even more so now to drive change. So, you know, I think we've all, we've been paying close attention to these. There's really been a tidal wave of hashtag activism in the feminist space recently. If you look at between Ban Bossy, Bring Back Our Girls, hashtag S.H.E Summit, of course, and Yes All Women very recently, it's been a really, really strong trend. So I was excited to have the opportunity to sit down with Krystal and discuss this further. And actually to quote Susan McPherson, who's a dear friend of ours and is going to be moderating a panel here at S.H.E Summit. She wrote an article in Forbes.com recently, and I quote, she said, "This is truly the breakout year for driving awareness on women and girls issues through hashtag activism. And some have a professional women's focus, such as Lean In, Change the Ratio, and others focus on empowerment like Girls Rising, Women Should, or Girls in Danger, such as Bring Back Our Girls and We Are Silent." So I'd love to ask you, Krystal, to what extent do you see these hashtags really driving the conversation and the media agenda versus being the story themselves?
Sure.
Like, are they novelties?
Yeah. Well, first of all, good morning, S.H.E Summit. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think this conversation is so important, and we have seen a huge burgeoning of all this, what's called hashtag activism, sometimes in a disparaging way, right? As if doing something online isn't as real as going out and pounding the pavement and being there in person. But in fact, in ways that have been small, like pushback against iTunes for having a horrific app where people could perform plastic surgery on women, and it would talk about all the ways that the woman's body was perfect. Online, there was a backlash. They got that pulled, so I would put that in the sort of smaller but real-world impact, to things like working together to track sexual violence in Syria and crowdsourcing from a feminist community where things are happening and what we can do about it. You mentioned the Yes All Women hashtag, which came up recently in the wake of that horrific Isla Vista shooting rampage, where, of course, the alleged shooter talked all about how he was so angry because women had spurned his advances, as if he was entitled to women's bodies. And that sparked a real conversation around attitudes towards women, not just in that instance, but in general. And I think one of the things that came to light there is that the majority of domestic violence, which is horrifically common in this country, it's the #1 reason that women go to the emergency room, is because of domestic violence. A lot of that violence stems from this attitude of entitlement. So even when it's just sparking a conversation through a hashtag, I think that's important. One of the reasons that I think feminists have really found each other online and coalesced into this kind of big community is almost out of necessity, both because of what you're pointing out, the statistics in the mainstream media still being very much an old boys kind of club. I can attest to that. And also because in a lot of ways, the online culture is very unfriendly to women. Women disproportionately face harassment online. About 72% of the instances of online harassment that have been reported over the past several years are women being harassed. We've seen really horrible examples of things like revenge porn, where an ex-boyfriend posts an illicit photo or an illicit video online without a woman's permission to stalk and harass her. And right now, the legal framework isn't there to push back against those sorts of abuses. So I think that's another reason why women, out of necessity, have come together online to sort of self-police that type of behavior. And then that has sparked a broader movement that you're seeing in these hashtags that are having a real-world impact. Yes, all women, bring back our girls, to cite a couple of recent examples. I was involved in an effort to push back against Rush Limbaugh for his attacks on Sandra Fluke, calling her a prostitute. Thank you. Yeah. And you know what? Rush, for the first time in his terrible, horrific career, actually had to apologize. And literally hundreds of sponsors dropped his show because they said, we don't want to be associated with this. And that was all because of what started as an online conversation and turned into people calling radio stations, calling sponsors and saying, what are you doing associating your ad dollars with this person? So it has a real world impact, and it feeds in to what the traditional media is actually covering. So it has that kind of an impact too.
Well, so what actually, what excites you most about these conversations, especially as they pertain to the feminist voice, but also, are there any aspects of it that you're wary of?
So one of the things that excites me the most, outside of just the specific campaigns, is I do believe there has been a general shift in awareness, right? When the CEO of Lululemon blamed his product's failures on women's thighs, and then was fired as a result of online activism, it raises an awareness that you just can't get away with this crap anymore, right? You're going to be held accountable. And just as importantly, in a way, I think that this community and the power of this community has made feminism cool again. It's made it cool to talk about the fact that there's only 5% of women in mainstream media clout positions. It's made it cool to talk about the fact that women disproportionately suffer in poverty. It's made it cool to be a feminist, and that's a tremendous shift. And it's not just about, an identity. It's about changing the world through that shift in perception.
I agree with you 100%. That also excites me. I'm very big on the resurgence of the word feminism.
Yeah.
There have also been a lot of critiques and arguments have been made that this kind of activism is a hollow activity, and that it's a feel-good thing to participate in, but that what do 140 characters really carry as far as weight? That these conversations are really just trends and reflect a kind of herd mentality. So what are your thoughts around that?
I completely disagree with that. We still need people who are out in the world doing that on the ground, what I call deep activism, right? Where you're, putting yourself at risk in the world, out there, taking action. And we have people who are doing that work. But we also need what I call broad-based activism. And I think that's the type that you see on Twitter, which can be just as impactful. I'll use the example of Bring Back Our Girls, which we mentioned, which was intended to drive attention to this horrific mass kidnapping of young women in Nigeria. And in fact, forced the president to talk about it, forced the mainstream media to talk about it, forced action to be taken. And that problem still obviously hasn't been resolved, but but it already has had an impact in terms of attention and resources. So the other thing that I would say is people who make that argument say, if you're just, you know, they call it slacktivism, right? If you're just tweeting out a hashtag, you're letting yourself off the hook from taking more challenging and potentially more impactful measures. But I've found the opposite to be the case. Because, and again, in my experience with the Rush Limbaugh situation, the people that I was talking to online, they were so inspired by the fact that they did something and it had an impact. That kind of power is addictive. So rather than letting people off the hook, by dipping their toe in the water with what they were doing on Twitter and on social media, it made them want to do more in the world. It helped them form a community of like-minded people that they could take that action with. So I think it has an incredibly positive feedback loop into more and more and more engaged activism, rather than the opposite of just saying, oh, I checked the box, right?
Well, I mean, the collective voice is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I was talking with my sister about this a couple weeks ago and discussing this particular topic. And we, you know, talking about the critiques, and she just made such a basic observation. How can you possibly discount that many people putting their voices towards one conversation?
Right.
How does that not have any meaning? So I obviously agree with you on all of those points. And I loved that op-ed in the New York Times this week, I think from Sunday, from Charles Blow, who he said he was driving his college-age son back to a summer program, and they were just casually talking in the car, and his son said, I believe it's very important for everyone to be a feminist, because he was really influenced by Yes, All Women and what that meant, and it really, really inspired him to reflect, especially as a young man. And with that being said, you know, I'd love to know, what would you like our audience, and especially the fact that there is a global live stream, and women around the world are watching this today. And so what would you like our audience to come away with?
You know, one thing that I will let you all in on, not very closely kept secret, everyone in media is on Twitter, right? We're tweeting, we're looking at what the conversations that are going on around us are, to have our finger on the pulse of what's happening. And by percent of the population, you know, the number of people on Twitter is still relatively small. So by being there and engaging, you are having a disproportionate impact. Your voice is disproportionately powerful. So, you know, I think you can take advantage of that in a way, and in a world where women's voices are in so many ways intentionally diminished, right? Online activism is one platform where we really can take advantage of having power. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, because there is so much abuse of women online, so many gendered attacks, so much horrific, I mean, just take a look at my Twitter stream if you want to see an example. We have to back each other up, right? We have to stand up for each other when we see that kind of crap and call it out, because that makes a difference. Right now, the legal framework isn't there to push back even against egregious threats, because they just don't know how to deal with it yet. So we have to sort of self-police. We have to back each other up. And that will make a difference in ways big and small.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. And I'd just like to remind all of you, don't forget that you are in the conversation. So hashtag
right.
#SheSummit.
Hashtag #SheSummit.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.